Eli had always preferred the quiet of nature. After years of service in the military, the loud noises and chaotic environments were behind him. Now he lived alone on a peaceful planet on the outer edge of human colonies. The planet was remote, wild, and rarely visited by others. He liked it that way. It gave him time to think, to heal, and to live without the shadow of war hanging over him. Today, like any other, he decided to take a hike through the rugged hills near his home. He'd seen this part of the planet many times before, the same jagged rocks and sparse vegetation, but there was something different about today. It was early in the morning, and the air was fresh, cool against his skin. As he walked, his boots crunched over the uneven ground, the solitude of the planet offering him a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Then he saw something. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, something he hadn't noticed before. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a body, a woman's body. Her skin was a strange shade of blue, unlike anything he had ever seen. She was lying unconscious against a large rock, her chest rising and falling weakly, but her breathing was shallow. Eli's heart skipped a beat. His first instinct was to run. The woman's appearance was alien, and he had no idea what to do. His mind raced, remembering the warnings from the military about interacting with unknown species. But then he remembered something else's training as a medic. If she was injured, he could help. He knelt beside her, carefully checking her condition. Her clothing was torn, and there were cuts and bruises all over her body. Despite the wounds, there was something mesmerizing about her. Her features were delicate, her long, flowing hair a deep shade of violet that shimmered in the sunlight. Eli hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. He'd never seen anyone like her before. But then, as if driven by something he couldn't explain, he gently placed his hands on her shoulders, trying to lift her. Her skin was surprisingly warm to the touch, a sharp contrast to the cool air around them. He could feel the heat of her body, a sign that she was alive, though barely. "Hey, can you hear me?" Eli said, his voice quiet but urgent. Her eyes fluttered. Open for a brief moment, they were a vibrant green, almost glowing with an otherworldly light. She gazed up at him, and for a second, Eli swore she was trying to speak, but no sound came from her lips. Then her eyes closed again, and her body slumped further. Panic started to settle in, but Eli pushed it away. His training kicked in. Had to get her to safety, and fast. With his arms under her back and knees, he lifted her up as carefully as possible. She was light, but the sudden weight of responsibility seemed heavy. He wasn't sure who or what she was, but something told him that he couldn't just leave her out here to die. His home wasn't far. And after a few minutes of struggling, up the hill, Eli finally reached the small shelter he called home. He'd built it himself, a simple structure made of metal and wood, with a small supply of food and basic medical equipment. Once inside, he laid the woman on his bed, gently removing the torn clothing to get a better look at her injuries. Her skin, though strange, appeared to be soft, and her body was built much like a human's. The cuts on her skin were deep, but they didn't seem to be bleeding much. There was something almost otherworldly about her, like her body was made to heal itself. Eli grabbed his medical kit and began cleaning her wounds. His hands worked quickly, though he still couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing something forbidden. Every time his fingers brushed against her skin, a strange sensation ran through him. Like he was touching something ancient, he tried to steady his breathing, focusing on her wounds. As a medic, he knew that time was of the essence, and he couldn't afford to waste it. But every moment that passed, his mind returned to the same question. Who was she? "Come on," Eli muttered to himself as he continued his work. "You're going to make it." But the woman didn't respond. She just lay there, her breathing steady, though still shallow. Eli felt a pang of worry. Was she in a coma? Or was this something more? As he worked, he found himself staring at her in silence, trying to figure out what she was. Her alien features were unlike anything he had ever encountered, but there was something about her that made him feel connected, a strange bond that he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the need to help her, or maybe it was something deeper. Minutes stretched into hours, and as Eli continued to care for her, A part of him began to wonder if his life would ever be the same again. He had no idea who this woman was or what her presence on this planet meant. But one thing was certain: the strange, beautiful alien lying in his bed was going to change everything. By the time night fell, Eli was exhausted, his body sore from carrying her, his mind overwhelmed with questions. But there was a quiet peace settling over him. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew this: he couldn't leave her. Not now, not when she needed him. As he sat next to her, watching over her like a guardian, Eli realized something. He had no idea who this woman was, but in that moment she felt like family he never expected to have. The morning light poured into the small cabin, casting long shadows over the room. Eli hadn't slept much. His mind kept racing as he sat by the bed where the injured woman lay, her body still and silent. Her breathing had become steadier, but there was no sign of her waking up. He watched her closely, wondering if she'd ever speak or show signs of life beyond this fragile existence. He had spent most of the night tending to her wounds, cleaning the cuts on her arms and legs, and bandaging them carefully. Despite the strange way her skin shimmered in the low light, she seemed human in many ways. Her features were delicate and beautiful, and her presence in his small home felt strangely familiar, like she belonged here even though Eli couldn't explain why. He reached for his med kit again, checking the supplies. His mind wandered as he prepared a few more healing herbs, ones he had grown himself from the planet's soil. Eli had never been an expert in alien biology, but he was a skilled medic, trained to handle a variety of situations. He hoped these natural remedies would help speed her recovery. As he applied the herbs to her wounds, he noticed something peculiar. The alien woman's injuries were already healing at an unusually fast rate. The cuts, which had been deep and raw, were closing up before his eyes. It was as if her body was rapidly regenerating, almost beyond the limits of what he knew was possible. Eli frowned, leaning in closer to study the changes. There was no blood, just faint, glowing scars where the cuts had been. It reminded him of something he had read about in old medical journals, stories of alien species with regenerative capabilities. But this was unlike anything he had seen. He couldn't understand how it worked, but it was clear that, whatever this woman was, she was not like any human he had encountered. "Are you going to wake up?" Eli whispered, more to himself than to her. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Eli sat back, his thoughts still racing. What was he doing here, alone, with an alien who had no memory or ability to communicate? Why did he feel so drawn to her, like there was a bond that had formed without him even realizing it? He sighed and stood up, walking to the small window that overlooked the rocky terrain outside. The sun had risen higher in the sky, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers from the nearby valley. Despite the peaceful surroundings, the reality of his situation lingered. He was alone with a stranger and injured alien, and there was no telling what dangers or challenges lay ahead. Eli turned back to the bed and checked the woman once more. Her skin still glowed faintly, but her eyes remained closed. He wasn't sure how long it would take for her to wake up, or if she would wake up at all. The thought made him uneasy, but he refused to give up. He had to help her with a deep breath. Eli moved back to the bed and sat next to her once more. His hand hovered over her shoulder, unsure whether to touch her again. But something about her seemed to call for his presence. Slowly, he placed his hand on her arm, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers. It was then that something unexpected happened. The woman's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time Eli saw them clearly. Her eyes weren't just green, they were almost luminous, like twin pools of light in the darkness. She blinked a few times, her expression still confused, as if she wasn't sure where she was or how she had gotten there. Eli's heart raced as she looked up at him. "You're awake," he whispered, a feeling of relief flooding through him. Woman's gaze met his, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Eli wasn't sure if she understood him, or if she even had the strength to speak. But then she blinked again, her hand trembling slightly as it reached up toward her face. She touched her head, as if trying to remember something. Eli gently took her hand, guiding it back down. "You're safe here," "You don't need to worry," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if his words made any sense to her. The woman's lips parted as if she was about to speak, but no sound came out. Her expression shifted, a mix of confusion and something else. Something Eli couldn't quite place. She looked at him, then around the room, her eyes filled with curiosity and wonder. He smiled nervously. "I don't know who you are, but I'll help you," he promised. Even though he had no idea what kind of help she might need, the alien woman slowly shifted in the bed, her movements careful as if she was testing her strength. Eli stepped back, giving her space, but he stayed close enough to catch her if she fell. After a few moments of hesitation, the woman finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Where am I?" Her voice had a strange melodic quality to it, and Eli's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the same language he was used to, but somehow he understood her words. "This is my home," Eli replied, unsure how to explain. "I found you outside, hurt. You've been unconscious for a while." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly as though she was trying to process what he said. She looked down at her body, her fingers gently brushing over the healing wounds that had already begun to fade. Eli noticed the way she hesitated, as if unsure whether she should trust him or not. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there? To something powerful? She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior in some way Eli couldn't understand. "You're safe now," Eli repeated, offering her a reassuring smile. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The woman's gaze softened, and she slowly nodded, though it was clear that she was still processing everything. Eli sat quietly, waiting for her to speak again, unsure what to do next. There was so much he didn't understand about her, about the situation they were in, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave her, not now. Not after everything that had already happened. The days that followed Lyra's awakening were strange. Eli tried to give her the space she needed, but every time he looked at her, he felt a pull, something unspoken, something deep that tied them together. Lyra was healing fast, faster than any human could. Her alien features, so unfamiliar at first, were now something Eli couldn't imagine being without. The soft glow of her skin, her strange eyes that seemed to hold mysteries, and the way she moved with an elegance that felt ancient, all of it fascinated him. But what troubled Eli the most was how quickly they had become connected. He had been a soldier for years, used to battles and clear lines between right and wrong. But with Lyra, there was no clear path, no rules. His life had been quiet, but now everything was changing. One evening, as they sat around the small fire Eli had made, outside he noticed how much more relaxed she seemed. She wasn't speaking yet, but her eyes would follow him around the cabin, always watching him. It was clear she was trying to understand him, to learn. In return, Eli found himself talking to her more, even though he didn't know if she could understand everything. "So," Eli said one evening, as they shared a simple meal, "I'm Eli, and you. I don't even know your name, but I'm glad you're here. You know, it's strange. I feel like I've known you forever. Gah, even though we just met." Lyra looked at him as he spoke, her head tilting slightly to the side. There was something about her that made Eli feel like she was listening to every word. The connection between them grew each day, but he was still unsure how to explain it. It felt like they were meant to meet, like fate had brought her to him. Though he couldn't say why, the days turned into weeks, and Eli found himself teaching her basic human signs and gestures. He showed her how to use simple tools, how to eat, how to communicate with him. In return, Lyra's movements became less cautious, as she reached out to touch things, to learn more about the world around her. Slowly, she began to understand that simplest of words and gestures, though she never spoke. One afternoon, as Eli was out gathering food, Lyra sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her body had fully healed, but her mind still seemed distant, lost in something that Eli couldn't understand. He watched her from a distance, his heart heavy with questions. What was she running from? Why had she been injured? And why had fate chosen him to care for her? Eli returned to the cabin, carrying a few gathered fruits and vegetables. He found Lyra sitting quietly, her hands resting in her lap. As he set the food down, he noticed she was staring at her hands, as if in deep thought. "Hey, Lyra," he said softly. "What's on your mind?" She looked up at him, her eyes still distant, but there was something in them, something he couldn't explain. Slowly, she reached for the fruit Eli had brought. And for the first time, she made an effort to communicate. Eli watched as she took a piece of fruit in her hand, turning it over as if studying it. Then, she placed it back on the table. She reached out again, but this time, she gently touched Eli's arm. The simple gesture was like a small bridge being built between them. Eli's heart skipped a beat. He could feel her presence now, more than just a physical being. She was beginning to connect with him, to trust him in ways he hadn't expected. "I don't know what you're thinking, but I can feel it," Eli said, almost as if speaking to himself. "You're not alone. I won't let anything happen to you. I don't know what's out there." Lyra's eyes softened, and she nodded slightly. Her fingers brushed against his arm again, but this time she held on for a moment longer. Eli could feel the warmth of her touch, and it made him realize how much he had come to care for her. It wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was about something deeper. As the days went on, Eli began to notice little changes. Lyra started to smile more often. The soft curve of her lips when she looked at him was enough to send a wave of warmth through his chest. Her silent presence began to feel like a comfort, like a part of his life he never knew he needed. One evening, while they sat by the fire, something strange happened. Lyra reached out and touched the fire's flame. Her fingers hovered just above the dancing light, and for a brief moment, the flame seemed to flicker brighter. Eli stared, his breath catching in his throat. "What?" he whispered to himself, but Lyra didn't react. She just looked at him, her eyes calm and understanding. Eli leaned back, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Lyra wasn't just an injured alien. There was something about her that was different, something powerful. Why, for now, all he could do was stay close, protect her, and try to understand what their bond meant. The weeks passed quickly, and with every day, their connection deepened. It was no longer about saving her. It was about a shared existence. Eli couldn't explain it, but he felt something profound in the way they communicated through gestures, through shared looks, through the quiet moments that passed between them. One night, as they lay side by side in the cabin, Eli found himself staring at the stars through the small window. He had never been much of a stargazer, but tonight he couldn't look away. The universe felt vast, mysterious, and yet, in this small corner of it, Eli felt like he had found something important. "I never expected this," Eli whispered to the stars, though he wasn't sure if anything was listening. "I never thought, you'd be here." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes shining softly in the moonlight. She didn't speak, but her hand found his. And in that simple gesture, Eli knew that, despite everything, this strange, beautiful bond was only just beginning. Eli woke up early the next morning, as he always did. The sky outside was still dark, and the air had a fresh chill to it. He stood by the window, looking out at the vast landscape, and felt a deep sense of peace. The days had been simple, but good. He had grown accustomed to the quiet, to the way Lyra moved through his home, her presence becoming a constant that he now depended on. But lately, there was something different. Lyra's healing had continued at an astonishing rate. Every time he looked at her, he noticed more subtle changes. She was becoming stronger, more aware of her surroundings. The strange glow that had first caught his attention had faded, but there was still a quiet power in the way she carried herself, as he prepared for the day. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He didn't know what it was. Maybe it was just his imagination. But his instincts told him that there was more to Lyra than he had yet discovered. He turned around to find her sitting at the table, her fingers tracing the edges of the food they had gathered earlier. She was staring at the fruit in front of her, but her eyes seemed distant. Eli had seen that look before, the kind of look someone gets when they're lost in their thoughts. She was thinking, trying to figure something out, but Eli couldn't tell what. "Lyra," Eli said, his voice soft but curious. "What's going on? Look like you're somewhere far away?" She looked up at him, and for a moment, her expression was unreadable. Eli felt his heart beat faster. There was something in the way she looked at him, like she was deciding whether or not to reveal something. Slowly, Lyra stood up and walked to the small shelf in the corner of the cabin. She reached for a strange-looking device, one Eli hadn't seen before. It was metallic and smooth, with glowing symbols etched across its surface. She held it out to him, her eyes meeting his. Eli raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Lyra placed the device in his hands, and as he touched it, a strange warmth spread through his fingers. The symbols began to glow brighter, and before Eli could react, the device clicked, revealing a holographic display. The light from the device lit up, the room casting long shadows on the walls. Eli blinked, taken aback. "What the?" He looked at Lyra, who was still standing silently, watching him with an intensity that made him uneasy. The hologram showed images of stars, planets, and strange symbols he couldn't understand. There were maps of distant galaxies, and Eli could see the outline of what looked like a vast starship. Images flickered and shifted, almost like a recording. But the details were too complex for him to grasp. He glanced back at Lyra. "What is this? What's it mean?" Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand on the device, and the hologram shifted. New symbols appeared. Ones that Eli recognized. His own planet, Earth, was shown, along with a route from one star system to another. There was something deeply familiar about the map. But it wasn't until the next image appeared that Eli's breath caught in his throat. The image showed a destroyed planet, a world that had been reduced to rubble. There was no life there, no sign of civilization, just ruins and dust. Eli's stomach twisted. This is a planet that's been destroyed. Who did this?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. It wasn't fear, but it was something close. She shook her head, her lips parting as if she were trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Instead, she pointed to the next image. The image flickered to a picture of Lyra herself. The alien woman stood in front of what appeared to be a group of other beings, all sharing the same strange features. They looked like a family, but there was a sadness in their eyes. Eli turned the device over in his hands, confused. "Are these ... your people?" Lyra nodded slowly, her expression heavy. It was clear that this was a moment of truth for her, one she had been avoiding. She didn't speak, but her eyes spoke volumes. Eli's heart pounded in his chest. "The last one left, aren't you? Your people ... they're gone." Lyra's eyes filled with a quiet sadness, and for the first time, Eli saw the weight of what she had been through. She wasn't just an injured alien he had found. She was a survivor, the last of her kind, alone in the vastness of space. Eli stood still, his mind racing. He had known there was something different about Lyra, something powerful. But now, it was clear. She wasn't just an innocent stranger. No, she was a witness to the destruction of her entire species, and she had somehow survived it all. "I'm sorry," Eli whispered, his heart aching for her. "I didn't know." Lyra reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. She wasn't asking for pity, but Eli could feel the pain in her gesture. She had lived through something unimaginable, and yet here she was, still fighting, still surviving. He took a deep breath. "I'll help you," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes, I'll help you. You're not alone anymore." The hologram flickered one last time before the device went dark. Lyra stepped back, her eyes never leaving Eli's. There was something unspoken between them now, a shared understanding that changed everything. He wasn't just protecting her. He was part of something bigger, something he didn't fully understand. But he knew that his life would never be the same again. Lyra had become his family in a way he never expected. And somehow, he was going to help her rebuild what had been lost. The days that followed were filled with change. Eli had never expected his life to take such a dramatic turn. He had come to this planet hoping for peace, a quiet life after years of war. Instead, he found himself in the middle of something far more complicated than he could have imagined. Lyra was no longer just the injured alien he had found. She was becoming a part of his life in ways that were hard to describe. They had settled into a routine. Eli would work on the small repairs around the cabin, gather food, and tend to the garden. while Lyra would help where she could. But she wasn't just a passive observer anymore. As the days passed, her strength grew. Her silent, graceful presence was now part of the cabin, and there was an unspoken bond between them, one that neither could deny. One evening, after a long day of work, Eli returned to the cabin to find Lyra sitting by the fire, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. The glow of the fire made her skin shimmer, giving her an almost ethereal quality. Her long violet hair flowed around her shoulders, and for a brief moment, Eli forgot all the mysteries that surrounded her. He set the gathered food down on the table and joined her by the fire. He didn't speak at first, just sat there, watching her. There was something about her presence that made him feel at ease, like everything in his life had led him to this point. "How are you feeling today?" Eli asked, breaking the silence. Lyra glanced at him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that always made him feel like she could see right through him. She didn't speak, but she nodded slowly. Lee smiled softly, though he could tell that there was something more beneath. "Surface, you've been quiet lately," he added. "Is everything okay?" For a moment, Lyra didn't respond. She stared into the fire, her expression distant, as if lost in thought. Then, without warning, she stood up and walked over to the small shelf near the wall. She reached for a strange object, one that Eli had never seen before. It was a small device, shaped like a sphere, with delicate markings etched into its surface. Eli watched as she carefully placed it in his hand. It was warm to the touch, and the markings on it seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. For a moment, the room seemed to grow quiet, the weight of the device in his hand making everything feel more serious. "What is this?" Eli asked, turning it over in his fingers. Lyra watched him intently, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite understand. Slowly, she gestured for him to hold it closer to his chest, almost like a silent request. Eli obeyed, unsure of what she wanted, but trusting her instincts. Suddenly, a soft hum filled the room, and the sphere began to glow. It wasn't bright or blinding, but it emitted a soft, steady light that illuminated the space around them. The markings on the sphere shifted faster, forming symbols that Eli didn't recognize. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, as if the device was connecting with him on a deeper level. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes never leaving him. She placed her hand over the device, and as she did, Eli felt a strange warmth spread through his body. The sensation was almost comforting, but it also felt like a warning, as if something important was about to be revealed. "I don't understand," Eli murmured, his heart racing. "What is this?" Lyra's eyes softened, and she placed her other hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Eli could feel the weight of her emotions, the fear, the sadness, and the hope that lay beneath the surface. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was someone who had experienced great loss and was now trying to rebuild something with him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the cabin was the soft hum of the device. Eli tried to understand what was happening, but he couldn't. It was like trying to grasp the stars with his hands too vast, too far beyond his reach. But then Lyra did something that surprised him. She stepped back, and with a deep breath, she placed a hand over her stomach. It was a subtle gesture, but it was enough to make Eli's heart stop. "You were right." Eli's voice trailed off as the realization hit him. "You're pregnant." Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. There was no fear in her gaze, only something else, something deeper. She was carrying his child. Eli sat back, his mind racing. This was impossible. He had been too focused on helping her to think about the consequences of their bond. But now, with the simple movement of her hand, everything had changed. They weren't just two strangers anymore. They were a family. How? How's that even possible? Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's gaze softened, and she placed her hand over his again, a gesture of reassurance. She didn't need to explain. He could feel it now, the connection between them, the bond that had formed without words. This wasn't just some accident. This was meant to be. Eli stood up, his heart racing. "I don't know what to say," he confessed. I never expected this. But I won't leave you. I'll protect you. I'll protect our child." Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time, she gave him a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Eli could see the trust in her eyes, the way she had come to depend on him just as much as he had come to depend on her. For the first time since they had met, Eli felt like he understood. He wasn't just her protector anymore. They were in this. Together, whatever came next, they would face it as a family. As the days passed, Eli's feelings for Lyra deepened. He wasn't just helping her survive anymore. He was building a life with her. A life he had never imagined before. Realization that he was going to be a father settled in. He knew that everything was about to change. The days that followed Lyra's revelation were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Eli had always been a practical man. He'd spent years in the military, making decisions based on facts, on logic. But now, with Lyra by his side, and the news of their child growing inside her, he was faced with something he couldn't control, something beyond logic. Each day brought new changes. Lyra's belly was beginning to show, and Eli found himself watching her more closely. It was clear that she was as much a mystery to herself as she was to him. The alien woman had never expected to find herself pregnant with a human child. And yet here they were, forging a bond neither of them had anticipated. Lyra had become stronger in the last few weeks, both physically and emotionally. She still didn't speak, but her eyes told a story. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had begun to trust Eli fully, and the silence between them no longer felt awkward. It was comfortable, even in its quietness. They had created something together, something beautiful and pure. They were both learning how to navigate this new world together. One afternoon, Eli found himself sitting outside, his back against the warm rock wall of the cabin, watching as Lyra picked flowers from the garden. The sun bathed the world in a soft golden light, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. He could hear the soft hum of insects in the air and the rustling of the trees in the gentle breeze. It was peaceful. But beneath the surface of this calm, Eli's mind kept racing. He had never been someone who was good with emotions. He didn't know how to prepare for the future, especially not one that was so unpredictable. But every time he looked at Lyra, something inside him shifted. He wanted to protect her, to protect their child, no matter what it took. He wanted to give them a life filled with safety and love, something he had never had before. He was determined to make sure they both felt that warmth, even if it meant facing things that terrified him. Lyra came over, holding a small bouquet of flowers in her hands. She smiled softly at him, her expression gentle, and handed him the flowers. Eli smiled back, taking them from her, but his thoughts were still heavy. "Thank you," he said quietly, admiring the delicate petals in his hands. "These are beautiful." Lyra sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't say anything, but there was a sense of peace in the way she sat, as if she understood the weight of his thoughts. For a moment, Eli felt a rush of gratitude toward her, toward everything they had shared so far. They were more than just two people surviving on a distant planet. They were partners, a family, in the truest sense of the word. "I don't know what the future holds," Eli said, his voice soft but steady. "But I know this'll protect you. I'll protect our child. We'll figure it out together." Lyra reached for his hand, her touch light but firm. Eli looked at her, feeling a deep connection with her. She didn't need to say anything. The simple act of holding his hand spoke volumes. She was with him, and that was all that mattered. The next few weeks brought more change. Eli began to make preparations, preparing for the future in ways he hadn't thought possible. He built a small nursery in the corner of the cabin, using the materials he had gathered over time. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a place where their child could grow, a place of safety and warmth. Eli didn't know how to build a future, but he was doing it step by step as the days went on. Eli's feelings for Lyra deepened. He was learning more about her past, and the more he learned, the more he realized how much he had to learn. She was a creature of mystery, a survivor of unimaginable loss. But she wasn't broken. She was strong, stronger than anything Eli had ever known. One evening, as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Eli sat on the porch, looking up at the vast expanse above him. Lyra joined him, sitting beside him in comfortable silence. He looked over at her, noticing how her belly had grown, how her body had changed to accommodate their child. She was beautiful in a way that was impossible to describe, her soft, glowing skin, her delicate features. The way she carried herself with such quiet strength. "I never thought I'd be here," Eli said quietly, breaking the silence. "Never thought I'd be a father, but now, can't imagine anything else." Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with something that Eli couldn't quite explain. She didn't speak, but the look she gave him was all he needed. She trusted him. She was ready for this new chapter, for the life they were building together. "I'm scared," Eli admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes to give our child a good life." Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his, her fingers warm against his skin. Eli's heart swelled with emotion. He'd never felt more certain of anything in his life. No matter what the future held, he knew he had found something worth fighting for. The days went by quickly after that. Eli worked tirelessly to prepare. For the birth of their child, he learned about alien medicine, seeking out anything that might help Lyra during the pregnancy. He had no idea how their child would be born or what to expect, but he was determined to be ready. He spent hours researching, gathering supplies, and making sure everything was in place. One evening, as he sat beside Lyra, his hand resting gently on her growing belly, he realized something. He wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, he was ready. He was ready to be a father, ready to be a partner. And most importantly, he was ready to be a family. "I'll always be here for you," Eli whispered to her, his voice filled with conviction. "I'll always be here for our child." Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time she smiled. Fully, a smile that reached her eyes. In that moment, Eli knew that together, they would face whatever the future had in store, and no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face it as a family.